Welcome to the History Maps podcast. So, you are the ruler of a rising regional superpower in the late 15th century.
Right.
And you send an envoy to a neighboring kingdom to ask for a diplomatic gift. Just, the hair of a white elephant.
Yeah, which is basically a massive power play, like a way to establish dominance over them.
Exactly. So, a few weeks later, this beautifully crafted box arrives back at your palace. You open it in front of your entire royal court, but there is no elephant hair inside. The box is literally full of elephant dung.
Right. It is just the ultimate diplomatic insult. And, it was a highly calculated one.
Yeah.
That single box of dung gave them the perfect pretext to launch an invasion of 180,000 men.
And they march across some of the most unforgiving mountainous jungle terrain on Earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which perfectly sets the stage for what we are looking at today.
Right. Today, you are getting a comprehensive deep dive into the history of the Lan Xang Kingdom. This is a major component of the Southeast Asian History series, and the mission here is to trace the rise, the Golden Age, and the eventual dissolution of Lan Xang.
Right, and if we translate that name into English, it means the kingdom of a million elephants under a white parasol.
So we're going to guide you through 4 centuries of history. We will look specifically at the mechanics of how geography, trade routes, religious shifts, and intense regional warfare forged a uniquely resilient Lao identity.
I mean, the name of the kingdom itself is just a perfect place to start, right? Because it serves as a kind of mission statement.
A million elephants under a white parasol.
Yeah. In the 14th century, the elephant was not just an exotic animal, it was the ultimate technology of war.
It was heavy cavalry, mobile artillery, and psychological terror all rolled into one.
Exactly. And the white parasol, on the other hand, was the preeminent symbol of Buddhist kingship across the whole region. It represented the unity of spiritual authority and earthly power.
So right there in the title of the kingdom, you have the dual pillars of its existence, martial strength and religious legitimacy.
Yeah, perfectly balanced.
But before we get to the founder of this kingdom, a man named Fan Gum, it is crucial to understand the political landscape you would have encountered in Southeast Asia prior to the 1350s.
Right, because it is so different from how we view borders today.
Yeah, if you open a modern atlas, you expect precision. You look at a border between 2 countries, there's a solid line, and you know exactly where one legal jurisdiction ends and another begins.
But if you transport yourself back to the 13th century, that concept of a map is completely useless.
Entirely useless.
Yeah, you are looking at a geopolitical reality that operated on entirely different physics. By the late 1200s, the dominant power in the region, the Khmer Empire, centered at Angkor in modern-day Cambodia, was in a state of slow, irreversible decline.
Right, they were overextended.
Yeah, dealing with the shifting of global maritime trade routes and struggling with large-scale ecological issues related to their massive water management systems.
So as Angkor's grip loosens, the territory that makes up present-day Laos reverted to this patchwork of smaller, semi-independent polities called Wong.
Right, and the sources refer to these Muong frequently.
Functionally, these are city-states, correct?
Yeah, city-states is the closest Western equivalent. You had Guangzhou, situated up in the mountainous north, which is the area of modern Luang Prabang.
Okay.
Then further south, along the floodplains of the Mekong River, you had Muang Vientiane, and even further south, Muang Sikatabang.
But these were not kingdoms with defined, fenced-off borders.
No, not at all. They operated under what political scientists and historians call the mandala system.
And this requires a clear explanation. Understanding the mandala system seems entirely necessary to understand how this empire functioned at all.
It really is.
So how does a government operate if it does not actually know where its territory ends?
Well, think of political power in this era not as a container with hard walls, but like a Wi-Fi router.
Okay, Wi-Fi router.
Yeah. The router is the central city, or specifically the central ruler. The closer you are to that router, the stronger the signal.
Right, so the king's power is absolute right in the capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He controls the labor, the agriculture, the military there. But as you move further away from the capital, out into the peripheral villages and the mountain passes, the signal gets weaker.
The central authority just begins to fade out.
Precisely. Power in a mandala system was measured by manpower and personal loyalty, not square mileage.
So a king's strength was determined by how many regional lords paid him tribute.
Yeah, and how many men those lords could supply for a military campaign or, a massive construction project.
Right.
Now imagine a neighboring city sets up its own Wi-Fi router and it starts broadcasting a stronger signal.
Oh, I see. A village sitting on the fuzzy edge between those two cities might suddenly decide to connect to the new, stronger network.
Exactly. They switched their loyalty and their tribute.
So the borders are basically constantly pulsating, expanding and contracting based purely on the military mass and agricultural wealth of the center at any given moment.
Yes. And the central artery that carried that signal, the absolute core of this entire gravitational system for Lan Xang, was the Mekong River.
Right, the Mekong dictated everything.
It really did. It determined where the fertile floodplains were for growing rice. It served as the primary highway for merchants, and it was the logistical route for moving armies.
But, the Mekong is not a gentle, easily navigable river from top to bottom. The geography itself acts as a massive filter.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have stretches that are perfect for trade, but then you hit something like the Cone Falls in the far south.
Right. The Cone Falls are a series of massive, violent rapids and waterfalls. They are virtually impassable by any kind of river vessel.
Which changes the whole dynamic.
It does. While the navigable stretches of the Mekong allowed culture and commerce to flow freely between the Lam Wang, features like the Cone Falls acted as this impenetrable natural defensive barrier against naval invasions coming up from the south.
So the geography created an isolated, culturally fertile corridor, but it was fragmented, just waiting for a singular unifying force to pull it all together.
Which brings the timeline to the mid-14th century and the arrival of that exact unifying force, Prince Fangum.
This is where the origins of the Lan Xang Empire truly begin.
Yeah. Fangum's story is deeply rooted in the complex politics of exile. He was born in 1316, the grandson of the king of Muangsua.
Okay.
However, when he was just a child, his father, who was the crown prince at the time, became embroiled in a severe scandal at the royal court.
Right. The chronicles offer slightly different accounts, but the prevailing record states his father had an illicit affair with a minor wife of the ruling king.
Exactly. And in a mandala system, disrupting the sanctity of the royal household is a direct threat to the ruler's legitimacy.
You can't have that.
No, so consequently, Fangum and his father were exiled and sent down the Mekong, eventually ending up at the Khmer court at Angkor.
So being exiled to Angkor in the early 1300s, even during its period of decline, means Fangum is essentially being sent to the Harvard of Southeast Asian statecraft.
It was an unparalleled political education. He was taken in by the Khmer king, Jayavarman IX, and raised effectively as a member of the royal household.
He gets immersed in all of it. The complex bureaucracy, the architectural engineering, and the sophisticated military tactics of a massive established empire.
He really does. He even eventually married a Khmer princess named Kyo Kengnya. So by the time he reaches adulthood, Fangum has deep familial ties to the Khmer leadership.
Then, the geopolitical pressures in the region shift dramatically. In 1351, a brand new, highly aggressive threat emerges to the west of Angkor, the Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya.
Right. Ayutthaya was expanding rapidly, directly challenging the remnants of the Khmer Empire for control over the Korat Plateau, which is in modern-day northeastern Thailand.
So Angkor finds itself in a highly vulnerable position.
Yes. They needed a strategic solution to secure their northern flank against these rising Thai powers, which included not just Ayutthaya, but also the kingdom of Sukhothai further north.
This looks like a classic proxy strategy. Angkor looks at Fangum, who has a legitimate bloodline claim to the throne of Muangsua up in the north.
Right.
They provide him with an army and essentially task him with reclaiming his ancestral home to build a friendly buffer state.
Exactly. They provisioned him with a force of Khmer soldiers known in the chronicles as the 10,000, and in 1351, Fangum begins his campaign.
But what is really critical to understand here is his methodology.
Yeah, because he does not take this army and march directly on his uncle in Muangsua. He understands the mechanics of the mandala system perfectly.
Right, if he just attacks the capital, the peripheral lords might just turn against him.
Exactly. He needs to build his own center of gravity first.
So he takes a highly circuitous strategic route. He starts in the far south, capturing the regions around Champasak.
Yeah, he is absorbing those local networks.
Then he moves north along the middle Mekong, taking Thakak.
He is systematically securing the entire river corridor, incorporating local militias into his Khmer core army. He even approaches the wealthy, powerful city of Vientiane and requests their submission and assistance.
But they refused him.
They do, but rather than bogging down in a costly siege against Vientiane at that moment, he just bypasses them and looks east for leverage.
Right, he moves to secure an alliance with Prince Neo of Muang Phuan, which sits on the plain of jars.
Huh.
This is a massive masterstroke of diplomacy.
It is entirely pragmatic. Muang Phuan was constantly under threat from the powerful Vietnamese kingdom of Dai Viet to their east, right across the Annamite Range.
Okay, so what is the deal he strikes?
It is straightforward. He utilizes his growing army to help Muang Phuan secure its borders and negotiate a settlement with Dai Viet. In return, Muang Phuan pledges vassalage to Fan Gum, providing significant manpower and supplies.
Let us trace the logic here, because this is wild. Fedungum basically takes venture capital from a failing company, Angkor, to start his own massive enterprise.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it.
He takes an army provided by Angkor, meant to serve Angkor's interests. He uses it to conquer his own ancestral lands, building local alliances along the way.
Right.
He handles complex border disputes with a foreign power like Dai Viet to secure his eastern flank, all before he ever sets his sights on his actual target.
And it works. By the time he finally moves his forces down the Namu River toward Muang Sua, he is no longer just an exiled prince with a foreign army. He is the head of a massive, battle-hardened coalition.
The psychological pressure on the capital must have been immense.
It was. Fangum launched 3 separate, brutal assaults on the city's defenses. The defending king, Fangum's uncle, realized that his mandala had just completely collapsed. The peripheral lords were all backing his nephew.
Facing total defeat and capture, the chronicles record that his uncle chose suicide.
Yeah, and his death clears the path. In 1353, Fan Gum enters Muang Sua, is crowned king, and formally declares the establishment of the Kingdom of Lan Xang Homkao.
The kingdom of a million elephants under a white parasol.
Exactly. But his ambition does not end with reclaiming his grandfather's throne. He clearly remembers the slight from Vientiane a few years prior.
Right, he consolidates his power in the north, and then in 1356, he marches his massive forces back south and systematically conquers Vientiane.
Vientiane was simply too wealthy and too independent to be left outside his control.
Sure.
But even after taking Vientiane, Fan Gum pushes further. He crosses the Korat Plateau, marching all the way to Royat. He is pushing directly into the territory that the expanding Ayutthaya Empire considers its own sphere of influence.
He marches an army right up to the doorstep of the very threat he was originally sent to buffer against.
Right.
And rather than fighting this massive coalition Fangum has built, the king of Ayutthaya chooses diplomacy.
Yeah. The king of Ayutthaya recognized the sheer military capability Fangum now commanded. He opted to buy peace.
And the tribute Ayutthaya sent was staggering.
Oh, absolutely. It included 100 war elephants, massive quantities of gold and silver, over 1,000 pieces of ivory, and critically, a royal princess offered as a second wife to Fangum.
So this marriage formalized a non-aggression pact.
Yes. By 1357, within just 6 years of starting his campaign, Fangum had engineered a mandala that was one of the largest territorial blocks in Southeast Asia.
It stretched from the borders of China in the north all the way down to the unnavigable rapids of the Mekong in the south.
Exactly.
But conquering an empire through sheer momentum is one thing. Governing a massive, newly forged state requires a completely different skill set.
It really does.
Which moves the history into the next crucial phase, the brutal reality of consolidation, shifting demographics, and intense internal turmoil.
Right, because Fangum was undeniably a brilliant military tactician, but perpetual warfare comes with a heavy domestic cost.
Well,
he continued to launch campaigns against neighboring states, such as Sukhothai in the 1360s. While these campaigns successfully expanded the kingdom's borders, they were deeply unpopular with the commoners who bore the brunt of the taxation and conscription.
Because an agricultural society can only sustain so many men being pulled away from the rice harvest before famine sets in.
Exactly. And the military exhaustion is compounded by deep political friction within his own royal court.
The court was totally fractured. On one side, you had the common lords and military commanders who had marched north with Fangum from Angkor.
Right.
And on the other side, you had the native Lao nobility of Muang Sua and the surrounding regions who felt marginalized in their own homeland.
Yes, furthermore, the chronicles indicate Fangum's behavior became increasingly autocratic. He was accused of asserting rights over noble women from prominent local families, which deeply alienated his core base of Lao supporters.
It is a toxic combination of war weariness, cultural friction at the highest levels of government, and moral outrage.
It culminated in a coup. In 1374, a conspiracy organized by his own ministers deposed Fangum.
Wow.
He was exiled to the territory of Muangnan, where he died a few years later. The man who united the kingdom was ousted by the very administrative apparatus he helped create.
So his son, Un Huyen, is elevated to the throne. He is crowned under the regnal name King Samsentai, and that name reveals a massive shift in how the kingdom is going to be governed.
Yeah, the name Samsentai translates literally to King of 300,000 Tai.
That is an incredibly precise number. It sounds less like a royal title and more like the results of a census.
Well, that is exactly what it was. Samsentai ordered a comprehensive demographic accounting of the male population available for corvée labor and military conscription.
Corvée labor needs some context for the listener. How does that system function in this economy?
So, in a society without a widespread, standardized currency, taxation is basically paid in human sweat. Corvée labor means that every able-bodied commoner owes a certain number of months of unpaid labor to the state each year.
Okay, got it.
The king uses this labor pool to build defensive walls, construct temples, maintain irrigation canals, or march off to war. By conducting this census, Samsentai was quantifying the exact economic and military engine of his kingdom.
But the name King of 300,000 Tai also sends a very specific political message regarding who is actually in charge.
It was a deliberate pivot. By emphasizing the Tai or Lao Tai demographic majority, Samsentai was officially localizing power.
Right.
He was signaling to the native Lao nobility that the era of Khmer dominance in the court, the legacy of his father's original army, was officially over.
So Samsentai focuses heavily on administration. He marries women from the royal courts of Ayutthaya and Lana, building a web of diplomatic stability.
He does. He secures highly lucrative trade agreements and formal recognition from the newly established Ming dynasty in China in 1402.
And he manages to rule for over 40 years, ushering in a desperately needed era of peace and economic growth. But the moment he dies in 1416, the entire system fractures.
Yeah. The succession mechanisms in a mandala state are often inherently unstable, relying heavily on the strength of the incoming personality. Following Samsentai's death, Lan Xang plunges into a deeply chaotic and violent period.
Really violent. Between 1428 and 1438, a span of just 10 years, 7 different kings are placed on the throne.
Yeah.
And every single one of them is assassinated.
7 regicides in a single decade. And the historical sources point to a single architect behind all this chaos, a figure known as Queen Mahadevi or Nangkeo Phimpha, frequently translated as the Cruel.
Right. Mahadevi was a senior female member of the royal family, likely a sister or daughter of Samsentai.
Yes. She operated entirely behind the scenes, orchestrating this string of assassinations by manipulating the various factions within the royal court.
Disposing of monarchs the moment they showed any inclination toward independent rule or threatened the interests of her specific faction. This requires a mechanical explanation, though. How does a single queen maneuver with such lethal efficiency in a society that is heavily patriarchal and dominated by military commanders?
It is a great question.
How do you pull off 7 royal assassinations without triggering a massive civil war or being immediately executed yourself?
To understand how she operated, you have to look at the structure of the Sena. The Sena was the royal council, composed of the highest-ranking nobility and military commanders.
Okay.
In Lan Xang, certain noble families held hereditary rights to specific administrative and military posts. A weak king could not simply fire them. Mahadevi was a master of the Sena.
She forged deep, unshakable alliances with the conservative local Lao nobility who were deeply suspicious of foreign influence.
So she essentially controls the bureaucracy.
Right.
But more importantly, she controlled the palace guard. The mechanics of these assassinations were rarely public spectacles. They were intimate, violent affairs within the palace walls.
Poisonings or swift executions.
Yeah, carried out by guards loyal entirely to her faction. She was the ultimate kingmaker, and when a young puppet king inevitably tried to assert his own authority, she utilized her control of the palace security to break him.
And some chronicles suggest that after running out of pliable male heirs, she may have grown tired of ruling from the shadows and briefly took the throne herself, which would make her the first and only female ruler of Lan Xang.
If she did rule directly, it was exceedingly brief. By 1438, the broader nobility and the regional military commanders had reached their breaking point.
The instability was destroying the kingdom's economy and prestige.
Absolutely. A coalition moved against her. She was deposed, and according to the record, she was taken to a specific point on the Mekong River, bound and drowned as a direct offering to the Naga, the mythical serpent spirits of the river.
It is a brutally poetic execution, and it underscores just how fragile the central authority was when the succession was contested.
It really does. It takes years for genuine stability to return, which finally solidifies when King Chakafat takes the throne in 1456.
Chakafat systematically dismantles the factionalism that allowed Mahadevi to operate.
Yeah, he curbs the power of the hereditary lords by appointing his own sons and trusted relatives to govern the crucial regional Hmong.
He also sponsors the construction of major Buddhist temples, which reinforces his spiritual legitimacy, and he brings a steady, prosperous peace back to the Mekong Valley.
He centralizes his authority successfully, but by building a strong, unified Lan Xang, he inadvertently makes the kingdom a target for a rapidly expanding neighbor.
Which sets the stage for 1479 and one of the most bizarre and devastating conflicts in regional history, the White Elephant War.
Right. So in 1479, a wild white elephant was captured in the jungle and brought to the capital for King Chakafat. You have to understand the geopolitical weight of a white elephant.
In the cosmology of Southeast Asian kingship, a white elephant is not merely a rare animal.
No, it is an active manifestation of divine favor. It signifies that the ruler is ruling with perfect justice, that the kingdom is blessed, and it elevates the prestige of the state above all its neighbors.
Over in Dai Viet, modern-day Vietnam, the Emperor Lan Xang hears that Lan Xang has acquired this symbol of absolute power.
Right.
He sends a diplomatic envoy across the mountains to Lan Xang. The envoy requests a gift for the Vietnamese court, simply a few hairs from this prized white elephant.
And the request was a highly calculated trap. It was a demand for tribute disguised as a polite diplomatic inquiry.
In the political language of the Mandala system, if King Chakafat provided the hair, he was tacitly acknowledging that Emperor Lan Xang held superior status.
Exactly. He would be submitting.
But Lan Xang perfectly understands the trap, and their response is legendary. They do not send the hair. They send a beautifully adorned box back to the Emperor of Dai Viet. And when the Vietnamese court opens this diplomatic gift, they find it packed full of elephant dung.
It was a profound, calculated insult designed to assert absolute independence and equality.
But a diplomatic insult over a box of dung leads to an invasion force of 180,000 men. Dai Viet mobilizes a massive army and begins marching west across the Annamite Range.
Yeah, the dung was merely the spark. The powder keg had been building for decades. You have to look at the underlying geopolitical tensions.
What were they?
Decades earlier, in 1421, during the famous Lan Xang uprising, the Vietnamese were fighting a brutal war of independence against the Chinese Ming dynasty.
Okay.
Lan Xang had sent a military force, ostensibly to assist the Vietnamese rebels. However, the Lan Xang commanders opportunistically switched sides and supported the Chinese instead.
That is a staggering betrayal in the middle of a war for survival.
Dai Viet never forgot it. Furthermore, there were ongoing, unresolved border skirmishes over the territory of Muang Phuan, which sat right on the border between the two powers.
So Emperor Lan Xang was in the middle of a massive expansionist phase anyway.
Right. He had just conquered the kingdom of Champa to the south. He was looking for an excuse to crush Lan Xang and secure his western border, and the box of dung provided the perfect, undeniable justification for war.
The sheer scale of the conflict that follows is difficult to comprehend. Dai Viet sends 180,000 troops, dividing them into 5 massive columns.
And Lan Xang responds by calling up its entire Corps V labor force, fielding an army of 200,000 infantry and 2,000 elephant cavalry.
The logistical reality of this war is a total nightmare.
It really is. Moving 180,000 men over the steep, densely forested Annamite Range requires supply lines stretching for hundreds of miles.
Maintained by tens of thousands of porters carrying rice on their backs.
Exactly. The mortality rate from malaria, dysentery, and sheer exhaustion before they even reach the battlefield would have been immense.
Despite the horrific logistics, the Vietnamese war machine is heavily disciplined.
They utilized advanced tactics, likely including early firearms and coordinated pike formations, to counter the shock of the Lao elephant cavalry.
Through a massive pincer movement, the Vietnamese columns break through the Lan Xang defenses.
They advanced relentlessly, eventually reaching and sacking the capital of Luang Prabang. King Chakafat and his royal court were forced to abandon the city and flee south down the Mekong River toward Vientiane.
Vietnamese push incredibly deep. The sources indicate one contingent marches all the way to the upper Irrawaddy River in present-day Myanmar. It appears as though the Lan Xang mandala has been completely shattered.
But this is where the geography of Southeast Asia turns against the invader. The Vietnamese forces were now operating hundreds of miles from their agricultural base.
Right, their supply lines were severely overextended and highly vulnerable.
Exactly. King Chakafat's younger son, Prince Thane Kham, took command of the remnants of the Lao army down near Vientiane. He recognized that he could not defeat the Vietnamese in a pitched battle on an open field.
So he completely changes the rules of engagement.
He resorts to a devastating guerrilla campaign. He utilizes the local terrain that his forces know intimately. They ambushed Vietnamese foraging parties, cut off their lines of communication, and slowly starved the occupying army.
Meanwhile, the neighboring kingdom of Lana to the west recognized the threat of a dominant Dai Viet and sent forces to intervene, destroying the northern arm of the Vietnamese military.
The combination of starvation, disease, and relentless guerrilla harassment breaks the Vietnamese offensive.
Prince Van Kham manages to rout the remaining army, pushing them into a brutal retreat back across the mountains.
The retreat was agonizing, but the Vietnamese managed to destroy the capital of Nguyen Phuong on their way out as a final punitive act.
Following this incredible reversal, Van Kham is crowned King Suvarnabhumong.
And his use of asymmetric warfare not only saved the kingdom, but effectively neutralized the existential threat from the east. The sheer cost of the campaign convinced Dai Viet to never attempt a full-scale invasion of Lan Xang again.
Securing a 200-year peace between the two powers.
Exactly.
And with the external threat finally eliminated, Lan Xang no longer has to direct all of its resources toward pure military survival. This creates the space for a massive cultural renaissance at the turn of the 16th century, primarily under the leadership of King Vizun, who rules from 1500 to 1520.
Up until this point, the identity of the kingdom was forged mostly in the crucible of war. Under King Vizun, Lan Xang begins to define itself intellectually, artistically, and spiritually.
Vizun was an intellectual and a massive patron of the arts.
He was. During his reign, the oral traditions and classical literature of the Lao people were systematized and committed to written manuscripts.
The religious texts definitely take priority here.
Oh, absolutely. The Tripitaka, which is the massive foundational collection of scriptures for Theravada Buddhism, was laboriously transcribed and translated from the ancient language of Pali into the local Lao script,
which is a monumental undertaking that requires vast monastic resources.
Furthermore, the royal court sponsored the adaptation of the great Indian epic, the Ramayana, transforming it into a distinctly Lao version known as the Phra Lak Phra Ram. They even formalized classical court music and standardized the royal orchestras.
But the most profound shift under Vizun is a fundamental change in the religious structure of the state.
Right.
Theravada Buddhism had been present and growing since the foundation of the kingdom, but it was operating alongside a much older, incredibly deeply rooted belief system, animism.
Satsanafai. This is the indigenous belief in the spirits of the natural world. Spirits of the forest, spirits of the ancestors, and most importantly for a riverine society, the Naga.
The mythical, powerful serpents that control the waters of the Mekong.
Right. In many parts of the kingdom, especially in the rugged northern valleys around the original capital, these animist beliefs were still the dominant spiritual force for the common people and the local lords.
So King Vizun decides it is time to definitively centralize the spiritual authority of the state around Buddhism. To do this, he elevates a very specific physical artifact, the Phra Bang.
The Phra Bang is a stunning standing image of the Buddha cast in a heavy alloy of gold and silver. It depicts the Buddha in the specific posture of dispelling fear.
And the history of this statue is fascinating. It had actually been brought to Lan Xang over a century earlier by Fan Gum's Khmer wife.
However, it had been kept securely in Vientiane because the animist factions in the northern capital were too powerful to accept a Buddhist image as the supreme protector of the realm.
But Vizun changes that dynamic. He formally moves the Phra Bang north to the capital. He officially designates it as the Palladium of the kingdom.
Right.
You should explain the concept of a palladium, because it is more than just a sacred relic.
A palladium is a physical object that is believed to provide absolute spiritual and military protection to a city or a state. The belief is that as long as the state possesses the palladium, it cannot fall.
So by moving the Phra Bang to the capital, Vizun was making a massive political statement. He even renames the capital city itself. Wang Sua becomes Luang Prabang, literally named in honor of the Phra Bang image.
The political mechanism here is brilliant. Centralizing religion around a singular physical object in the capital forces all the peripheral lords to acknowledge the king's authority.
Exactly. The local lords, who previously derived their authority from their relationship with local territorial spirits, now had to look to Luang Prabang and the king's specific Buddhist palladium as the ultimate source of legitimacy.
It utilized spiritual devotion to reinforce the political mandala.
And what is truly remarkable is that this centralization did not result in a holy war against the animists. The older beliefs were not violently purged.
No, they weren't.
The Naga were not banished from the culture. Instead, they were cleverly assimilated into the new Buddhist framework.
This really highlights the deeply syncretic nature of Lao culture. Instead of destroying the Naga, the royal architects incorporated them.
If you look at the temples built during this era, you see the Naga intricately carved into the balustrades of the staircases, their multi-headed hoods flared out.
The ancient spirits of the river were repurposed as the fierce, eternal guardians of the Buddhist faith. It was a seamless blending of the old world and the new.
That carefully constructed cultural unity, however, was about to face a terrifying external pressure test. As the timeline moves into the mid-16th century, a new threat emerges from the West that forces the leadership of Lan Xang to rethink their entire geographic strategy.
We enter the reign of King Photisarath, who rules from 1520 to 1550. He builds upon Vizon's religious policies, taking them to their absolute logical extreme.
Right. In 1527, he issues a royal decree officially declaring Buddhism the singular state religion and formally outlaws all public spirit worship, ordering animist shrines to be destroyed.
But Photisarath's most consequential decision is not religious, it is geographic.
Yeah.
He initiates the massive logistical process of moving the royal court south, away from the mountainous stronghold of Luang Prabang, down the Mekong to the city of Vientiane.
Why abandon a highly defensible capital? Luang Prabang was surrounded by rugged mountains. It held the Phra Bang. It seems like a massive risk to relocate.
The motivation was purely economic and administrative. Vientiane was the undisputed commercial heart of the kingdom,
It sat on the expansive, fertile floodplains of the middle Mekong.
which meant it was surrounded by agricultural land capable of producing enough rice to support a significantly larger urban population and a larger standing army.
Furthermore, Vientiane sat directly at the intersection of the major overland trade routes connecting the Korat Plateau to the Annamite passes.
Moving the capital to Vientiane gave the king direct physical control over the kingdom's primary wealth generation.
But placing your capital on a flat, fertile plain at the crossroads of international trade comes with a severe tactical disadvantage.
You strip away your natural defenses, you are incredibly vulnerable to a conventional military invasion.
And that vulnerability became an acute, terrifying reality because of a geopolitical shift happening to the West.
The Taungoo Empire, based in modern-day Burma and led by the fiercely ambitious King Bainong, was aggressively expanding. They were building the largest empire in the history of Southeast Asia, systematically conquering every kingdom in their path.
The threat is escalating rapidly. In the midst of this tension, King Photisarath dies in a freak accident. He is crushed by his own elephant during a diplomatic reception.
His son, Setharath, is forced to assume control of the kingdom during a period of existential crisis.
Setharath arrives on the throne with a remarkably complex geopolitical resume. At the exact moment his father died, Setharath was actually serving as the king of Lana, a neighboring kingdom to the west, having secured that throne through a highly complex web of marital and diplomatic alliances.
When he receives word of his father's death, he returns to Lan Xang to claim his primary inheritance. And when he travels back, he brings with him another incredibly powerful religious palladium, the Emerald Buddha.
Setharath formally completes the relocation of the capital, officially declaring Vientiane the seat of power in 1560. He immediately initiates monumental building projects to solidify the city's new status and project imperial strength.
He orders the construction of the magnificent That Loang Stupa, a massive golden monument designed to house a relic of the Buddha, which becomes the ultimate symbol of the Lao nation.
He also constructs the elaborate Wat Phra Kyo, a royal temple built specifically to house the newly acquired Emerald Buddha.
But while he's pouring resources into building these magnificent golden structures, the Burmese juggernaut is rolling closer.
In 1564, the massive Taungoo armies capture the powerful Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya. Then they march north and take Chiang Mai.
Refugees pour across the borders into Lan Xang, bringing horrifying accounts of the sheer size and brutality of the Burmese host.
Setharath analyzes the tactical situation. He knows that Vientiane, despite its newly reinforced walls, cannot withstand a prolonged siege by a Burmese army that possesses superior numbers and advanced artillery.
Right, you need to explain the mechanics here. If you just spent years building a magnificent, wealthy new capital, why do you not garrison your troops and defend it to the last man?
Because a 16th century siege against a superior force is a death sentence. The Burmese would encircle the city, cut off the food supply, and use their artillery to pound the wooden and brick defenses into dust.
Starvation and disease would kill the defenders before the walls even breached.
Setharath understood that the true strength of his kingdom was not the buildings in Vientiane. It was the manpower of his army and his own leadership.
So he makes a calculated, brutal strategic decision. When the Burmese army finally marches on Vientiane, Setharath orders the complete evacuation of the city.
He takes the royal court, the army, and the civilian population, and they vanish into the dense jungles.
But the strategy went far beyond a mere retreat. He executed a flawless, scorched earth campaign. Before abandoning the capital, his forces systematically stripped the entire surrounding countryside of food.
They burned the rice stockpiles they couldn't carry, poisoned the wells, and drove all the livestock away.
He intentionally leaves the Burmese a magnificent, empty city with absolutely nothing to feed their massive army.
The Burmese occupy Vientiane without a fight, likely feeling victorious. But within weeks, the reality of the logistics sets in. An army of that size consumes thousands of pounds of rice a day.
With no local supplies, they begin to starve. The Burmese commanders are forced to send foraging parties deep into the surrounding, unfamiliar jungles.
Which is exactly where Setharath and the Lao army are waiting.
Setharath launches a relentless, highly coordinated guerrilla war. His men know the terrain intimately. They utilize the thick jungle canopy to ambush the Burmese supply lines, slaughter the foraging parties, and launch lightning-fast night raids against the Burmese encampments before melting back into the forest.
Starving, decimated by tropical diseases, and constantly bled by these guerrilla attacks, the Burmese king Bayanan realizes his position is untenable.
In 1565, he is forced to order a humiliating retreat.
Setharath successfully repels the greatest military machine of his era. And remarkably, he does it again when the Burmese launch a second massive invasion a few years later.
By the 1570s, Lan Xang stands as the only independent Thai kingdom left in the region. Their neighbors, Ayutthaya and Lana, are entirely under Burmese subjugation.
Setharath's military genius undoubtedly saved Lan Xang from erasure. However, his ambition ultimately proved fatal.
In 1571, he embarks on a military campaign south into Cambodia. His goal was to secure southern trade routes and gain direct access to the European firearms trade that was beginning to flow through the coastal ports.
During this campaign, deep in the Cambodian jungle, he mysteriously disappears. The royal chronicles offer no definitive explanation. They simply presume he was killed in an ambush.
His sudden disappearance creates a massive immediate power vacuum. The strong central router is suddenly unplugged.
Without his unquestioned leadership, the intense factionalism among the nobility returns instantly. Vientiane is weakened by internal conflict, and eventually it falls to a third Burmese invasion.
Lan Xang is reduced to a vassal state, forced to pay tribute to the Toungoo Empire for a period of time.
It takes 2 decades for the kingdom to recover. It is not until 1591 that Setharath's son, Prince Nokio Kumane, who had been held as a political hostage in the Burmese court since childhood, is allowed to return.
He manages to rally the Lao nobility and formally restores the kingdom's absolute independence. This period of intense turbulence and recovery ultimately sets the stage for what historians universally consider the absolute peak of Lan Xang's power and cultural influence.
The Golden Age. You are looking at the reign of King Srinya Vongsa, who rules from 1637 all the way to 1694. That is 57 consecutive years of peace and prosperity.
Srinivangsa was a masterful administrator. He stabilized the kingdom not through constant warfare, but through the implementation of rigid, comprehensive legal codes, and by aggressively negotiating clearly defined, mutually respected borders with all neighboring states.
He established himself as an absolute monarch, in the truest sense of the term.
For the first time in this history, you actually have first-hand written accounts from outsiders detailing exactly what the kingdom looked like, because this is the era when the first European visitors arrive in Vientiane.
In the 1640s, a Dutch merchant named Gerrit van Weisthoff travels up the Mekong seeking trade agreements, and a Jesuit missionary named Father Giovanni Maria Luria resides in the capital.
Father Luria's journals provide a stunning, highly detailed visual record of the sheer opulence of the court. He describes the royal palace in Vientiane as being of prodigious size, stating it was so large and complex that a foreigner would mistake the palace grounds for an entire city itself.
He writes specifically about the king's private apartments, noting they were adorned with a magnificent portal and constructed entirely from incorruptible teak timber.
He marvels at the excellent bas-reliefs carved into the wood, observing that they were so delicately and thickly gilded they appeared to be cast from solid gold rather than just covered with gold leaf.
He describes the spacious courtyards, the extensive brick houses covered with glazed tiles that house the massive bureaucracy of court officials. It is a portrait of immense, highly concentrated wealth.
But it is crucial to understand that this wealth and stability were maintained through an iron-fisted, uncompromising application of the law. Serinivongsa was determined to eradicate the factionalism that had plagued the kingdom in the past.
To do this, he decreed that the law must apply equally to every single person in the mandala, regardless of their bloodline or social standing.
And he proved his commitment to this principle in the most extreme, heartbreaking way imaginable. His own son, the crown prince and sole heir to the throne, was caught committing adultery with a palace attendant.
Under the legal code Serinivongsa had established, adultery within the royal household was a crime punishable by death.
The nobility assumed the king would grant a royal pardon. It was his only son. But Serinivongsa refused to commute the sentence. He ordered his own son to be executed according to the law.
It is a terrifying demonstration of absolute justice. The message broadcast to the regional lords and the peasantry was unmistakable. If the king is willing to execute his own blood to uphold the law, no one is untouchable.
The irony, however, is devastating. By executing the crown prince, Serinivongsa demonstrated absolute justice in the short term, ensuring domestic tranquility for the remainder of his reign.
But he simultaneously doomed the kingdom in the long term by removing the only clear, undisputed successor to the throne.
Before examining the catastrophic consequences of that execution and the eventual fall of the kingdom, it is important to step back and look at the daily life, the societal structure, and the actual economic engine that sustained this 57-year golden age.
How did Lan Xang generate this immense wealth on a day-to-day basis?
The society was incredibly diverse, shaped entirely by the varying altitudes of the geography. The sources group the populations into three broad general categories.
You have the Lao Lum, the lowland peoples who lived in the river valleys and formed the political core of the state.
You have the Lao Thurong, who inhabited the middle mountain slopes, and you have the Lao Sung, the highland tribes living at the highest elevations. Each group utilized entirely different agricultural practices and maintained distinct cultural traditions.
But the foundation of the diet across the region, then as it is now, was glutinous rice, commonly known as sticky rice. The cultivation of this specific crop is a massive factor in how the society functioned.
It is the defining economic variable. Glutinous rice is highly labor-intensive to cultivate, requiring meticulous water management and manual harvesting.
More importantly, it has a relatively low yield per acre compared to the varieties of floating rice grown in the massively flooded plains of Ayutthaya to the south.
The economic implication here is huge. If your primary agricultural product is low yield and requires maximum human labor just to feed the local population, you cannot build a wealthy empire simply by exporting grain.
You do not have the massive surpluses required for that kind of economy.
Exactly. The wealth of Lan Xang did not come from the rice paddies. It came from the dense jungle forests.
The kingdom was incredibly rich in high-value, low-weight commodities that were highly prized in international markets.
They exported vast quantities of ivory, benzoin resin, which was highly demanded in China and the Middle East for making incense, rhinoceros horn used in traditional medicines, and most surprisingly, enormous quantities of deer skins.
Deer skins seem like an oddly mundane product to build an empire's wealth upon.
There was a massive, insatiable demand for high-quality deer skins in Japan during this period. The skins were essential for manufacturing the supple, durable leather required for constructing samurai armor.
There was also high demand in China for clothing and parchment.
Lan Xang had abundant wild forests and a highly sophisticated network of local merchants. These lowland merchants would travel into the mountains, trading iron tools and silver with the Lao Thiang and Lao Sum highland tribes in exchange for these precious forest products.
But Lan Xang is completely landlocked. How does a kingdom without ocean ports or maritime fleet maintain such leverage in international trade?
Geography was Lan Xang's ultimate economic bottleneck. To get those lucrative deer skins to the merchants of Japan or the Ming Dynasty, the Lao traders had to transport them on river barges down the Mekong or organize massive caravans to travel overland across the Korat Plateau.
They had to sell their goods in the established ocean ports of Ayutthaya, Cambodia, or Vietnam.
They are entirely dependent on intermediary kingdoms. They generate the raw materials, but they do not control the final point of sale to the global maritime market.
And because they lacked deep-water ports, they missed out on the most transformative, power-shifting trade of the 16th and 17th centuries, the European maritime firearms trade.
Coastal kingdoms like Ayutthaya grew immensely powerful because they could trade directly with Portuguese and Dutch galleons, acquiring massive quantities of advanced muskets, cannons, and mercenaries.
Lan Xang, situated deep inland, had much more restricted, expensive access to this military technology.
You have a kingdom dealing with a geographic and economic bottleneck, heavily reliant on a political system that requires a strong, singular leader to prevent factionalism.
When King Suri Navongsa dies in 1694, leaving behind no undisputed crown prince, the fragility of the entire Mandala system is brutally exposed.
The succession dispute that follows his death is not just another period of turbulence, it is catastrophic. The regional lords refuse to submit to a central authority.
The kingdom completely fractures. By 1707, the once unified kingdom of a million elephants definitively splits into three separate, significantly weaker states.
The kingdom of Luang Prabang in the north, the kingdom of Vientiane in the center, and shortly after, the kingdom of Champasak in the south.
By dividing themselves into three smaller mandalas, they make themselves incredibly vulnerable prey for their neighbors. Throughout the 18th century, these divided Lao states fall under the suzerainty of a resurgent Siamese empire centered in Bangkok.
Suzerainty is a crucial concept here. It means that while the kingdoms of Luang Prabang, Vientiane, and Champasak retained their own local kings and managed their own internal daily affairs, they lost their sovereignty in foreign policy.
They were vassal states. They were required to pay heavy annual tribute to Siam, provide military forces when demanded, and acknowledge the Siamese king as their ultimate overlord.
There is one major, desperate attempt to cast off this foreign subjugation. In 1827, Chao Nu, the ruling king of Vientiane, secretly builds an army and launches a massive rebellion against Siam.
Chao Nu hoped to capitalize on what he perceived as Siamese weakness, believing they were distracted by the encroaching British Empire.
But his intelligence was flawed. The Siamese response to his rebellion was absolute, overwhelming, and merciless. They marched a massive, modernized army north.
They did not simply defeat Chao Nu's forces on the battlefield. They decided to erase Vientiane as a political entity.
The destruction is total. Father Laria's descriptions of the magnificent teak palaces, the wealthy courtyards, the sprawling infrastructure, the Siamese army systematically levels all of it to the ground.
They forcibly deport the majority of the civilian population across the Mekong River into Siamese territory to work as agricultural labor.
And critically, they confiscate the Emerald Buddha, permanently removing it to Bangkok, where it remains enshrined today as the Palladium of Thailand.
The political state of Lan Xang was completely dismantled. By the late 19th century, the geopolitical landscape shifts again with the arrival of a completely foreign power, the French.
In the 1880s, bands of heavily armed Chinese marauders, remnants of a failed rebellion known as the Black Flag Army, swept south and began terrorizing the weakened Lao territories. The Siamese forces were unable to adequately defend their vassals.
The French, who have already established control over Vietnam, used this instability as a pretext. In 1893, they employed classic gunboat diplomacy.
They sail warships up the Chao Phraya River to Bangkok, training their cannons on the royal palace, and forced Siam to formally cede all Lao territories east of the Mekong River to the French Empire.
The French colonial administrators literally redrew the map. They took these fractured, formerly independent territories, grouped them together with a hard-defined border, and named the new administrative protectorate Laos.
It is a profound historical irony. The political state of Lan Xang dissolved completely. The monarchy survived in Luang Prabang, but only as powerless figureheads operating under the strict supervision of French colonial officials.
But while the state died, the cultural identity forged during those 4 centuries of Lan Xang absolutely endured.
The shared language, the deep adherence to Theravada Buddhism, the distinctive temple architecture, and the unifying historical memory of Fanangam and Sethatharath, that cultural bedrock proved unbreakable.
It survived the pressures of French colonialism, it survived the devastating devastation of the Indochina Wars, and it provided the foundation for the modern, independent nation of Laos that finally emerged in 1953.
It is a testament to the fact that the institutions built during the Golden Age were deeply rooted in the daily lives of the people. We started by talking about modern maps and how we expect borders to clearly define where one thing ends and another begins.
But the history of Lan Xang proves that culture leaves marks that simple black lines on paper cannot possibly contain.
That reality leads to a final, fascinating historical detail. When the Siamese Empire originally annexed the Lao territories and suppressed the rebellion of Vientiane in the 19th century, they wanted to project their total dominance.
So they minted new official state seals for the administration of the region.
These seals graphically depicted the Garuda, the powerful mythical bird that serves as the emblem of the Thai monarchy, actively devouring the Naga, the ancient serpent symbol of the Lao people and the Mekong River.
It was a clear, unmistakable political threat stamped onto every official document, a bureaucratic message of absolute eternal conquest.
Yet, if you walk through the streets of Vientiane or Luang Prabang today, you will see the Naga everywhere. It is intricately carved into the sweeping roofs of the Buddhist temples. It is woven into the complex, beautiful patterns of traditional silk textiles, and it is the central figure in massive annual river festivals.
The Siamese Garuda stamped on those 19th century documents was temporary. The Naga, rooted in the beliefs of the people and the reality of the river, remained.
It leaves you with a profound question to consider. Can military conquest, or a line drawn on a map by a colonial power, ever truly erase a cultural symbol that is fundamentally tied to the natural landscape of a people's homeland?
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.